Life's a serious business, and you're an important. You have a deep intrinsic value, and if you don't bring it to the surface, the world is much lessened as a consequence of your failure. And it might be crucial what you have in you. I didn't really understand until I went on tour, I would say. I didn't understand how much people are starving for a word of encouragement. I had no idea that the desperate depth of that starvation, and to see why that is so affecting. I guess I saw it most particularly in the case of young men. Not limited to young men, but that's where I could see it most, I don't know, grippingly in some sense. Because, well, you know, masculinity is toxic and everything we do is destructive, and we're leading the entire cosmos to perdition. And, you know, those are deep doubts, and fair enough. I do believe in the environmental movement there's a call, an unrecognized call to individual responsibility, but it shouldn't be purchased at the cost of the denigration of the human being. And that's not helpful. It's a form of resentment and hatred disguised as ethical striving, and it's deadly. And so I'm doing what I can to encourage. What's going on? Well, it's not nothing. Okay, so and then we seem all to have the intuition that stories differ in their depth. Oh, that's shallow. That was a shallow movie. That was a deep movie. We experience that in terms of, and we have a metaphor for shallow versus deep. Deep is like water. Mm-hmm. What's deep down there in the depths? Well, that's the question that manifests itself to us when we listen to a deep story. Well, that catches us outside our rationality. Well, what's it pointing to? Well, that's the question. And see, this isn't a rational question. You have to observe your own experience. Are you gripped by stories? Yes. Do you believe they vary in depth? Yes. Do you know what that means? Well, not explicitly, but you experience it. Okay, let's take that experience apart. Well, a deep story signifies many things, whereas a shallow story signifies only one or two. If it's a deep story, it might fundamentally change the way you view everything. That's what the deepest stories do. Well, so then we tell stories over centuries, over millennia. And some of them we remember. Well, why? Well, because they fit the shape of our mind. Well, why? Well, for evolutionary reasons, if you want to get scientific about it. It's like, well, we have to fight off predators. Well, what exactly is a predator? And then, because a predator, see, just that word is an abstraction from a set of differentiated phenomena. A wolf isn't the same as a shark, but they're both predators. So there's already an abstraction there. You abstract up the idea of predator, and they say, how do you defend yourself against a predator? Well, then you might say, what's the best defense against the worst predator? Then you might say, what's the worst predator? You know, people talk about life and its meaning, and they say, well, life is meaningless, but people never mean that, because if you're in pain or you're terrified, you're overwhelmed with meaning. It's just not the kind of meaning you want. And it's not a reality you can talk yourself out of easily. And that's particularly true of pain, but it can also be true of anxiety. And so the question is there a reliable source of meaning that you can set against that? And what's its nature, if so? And so here's a way of conceptualizing it to some degree. So I'm currently in a rather remote location in Northern Ontario. And one of the advantages to being here is that I can go out on my dock at night and I can look up and see the night sky. And when you see the night sky, when it's pitch black, you are face to face with something as near to the infinite as we can face in a prosaic day-to-day setting. And so there's an experience that goes along with that, and the experience is one of awe and wonder. And awe is a very interesting emotion. Let's say it's unbelievably ancient from a biological perspective. So if you feel awe, your hair might stand up on end. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get that feeling, chills running down your back, say when you're listening to music that you particularly enjoy. And that's a variant of the reflex that prey animals have when they see a predator. Their hair stands on end so that they look bigger. Now, of course, they don't know that. So part of that feeling of awe is tied to our ancient mammalian heritage. It's a variation of the response we had to a predator. We're in the face of we're facing something much greater than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's more to it if you think it through, because when you face the night sky, for example, or you face something, you confront something that fills you with wonder and awe, there's also a call to action that's sort of implicit in it. And maybe you think, well, the wolf is calling to the rabbit to be better at defending itself in some sense, to be a better rabbit, because otherwise, man, you're going to be eaten by the wolf. And when you look up in the night sky, to the night sky, and you feel awe, there's a call there. It's part of that experience to imitate that great thing that you perceive. Now, you might say, well, how can you imitate the infinite cosmos as well? Obviously, that's a very complicated question. But, you know, you're a very complicated thing. And God only knows what it means for you to imitate the infinite when you apprehend it. I mean, that's, in some sense, that's the fundamental question of life, is how do we adapt ourselves to the infinite complexity that surrounds us? What must we become? Well, you don't merely think that through. And I mean, you don't, I don't, human beings in general don't. We puzzle it out, and we use all sorts of information to do that. And some of these more primordial experiences that are outside the domain of strict rationality nonetheless point us in an ethical direction. And the ethic would be, you should and could be more than you are. Well, then the question is, how do you bring that to earth? How does that look when you try to embody it day to day? Mm-hmm. Well, I would say these are obviously not my ideas. They're very old ideas. Well, maybe you ally yourself with truth to the degree that you can. Maybe you pursue beauty. Maybe you pursue the love that attaches you appropriately to other people, etc., etc. And you do that because, well, I think you do it because life is very, very difficult.